Hello guys. Today I'm interviewing one of my online clients, Nicola, who's got a really great story about her preparations for the Hump Ridge track in New Zealand last year. Now in this episode, Nicola shares a little bit of background around her love for hiking and what got her into it and how she's enjoyed it over the years. But specifically, she's going to be talking about her preparations leading up into the Hump Ridge track and also what she did when she was told she couldn't do any walking or hiking when she was 6 weeks out from her adventure, and how she got herself in a physical position to succeed in the adventure and not only do it but actually get through it comfortably without actually hiking. So I think this is going to be a really valuable lesson and really valuable episode for many hikers out there who might be suffering from similar situations, might be recommended by a physio or physical therapist to back off on their hiking when they're leading into an adventure, so you can know that it is possible if you do the right things. Let's get into it. All right, so welcome, Nicola. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I'm really excited to have you on board because, we worked together, throughout last year leading into one of your adventures, which I'm sure you'll be talking about in a moment. But as I was saying before we hopped on the show, your story and the process you went through and the obstacles you came across that I know of in that process, I know a lot of people struggle with this when they're leading into particular adventures. And I know so many people listening to this podcast will be in similar situations. So I'm really excited to have you on board just to talk a little bit about your experiences and how you went through everything. Because I know a lot of people are going to be able to resonate with exactly where you went, where you were and what you got through. So to start off with, do you mind just introducing yourself, who you are, where you're from, and just a little bit about your background in hiking?
So my name's Nicola and I'm from Hamilton, which is in the North Island of New Zealand. My background in hiking, I have both my parents are keen trampers. Both my mum and my dad are very keen on the outdoors, and I grew up in the Central Plateau region of New Zealand, which is the first national park in New Zealand, where that is. So both my mum and my dad worked for what is now the Department of Conservation, and my dad was quite instrumental in building huts and tracks around the Tongariro National Park area. So having both parents involved in hiking, it was me and my sister kind of got dragged up hills, I guess, uphill and down dale with both of our parents. So I don't know that I particularly liked it during the younger years and the teen years, but it was a little bit later during my mid-20s, I guess, that I actually found that I enjoyed it, and now I just love being outdoors and love all the places that you can go, what you can see, what you can do.
I know for myself, when I was younger, I definitely didn't enjoy some of the hiking as much as I do these days. There's sort of that period where it's a bit of a drag when your family takes you out. What are the type of hikes? Like, you've got so much in your backyard over there. What are some of the hikes you've done in the past?
I've done a couple of what we call the Great Walks here in New Zealand. I've done parts of around Lake Waikaremoana, the treks in the Tongariro National Park. I've done the Heaphy Track, the Kepler, the Root Burn, and then I guess those are the well-known tracks. And then just in my own backyard, we've got hills nearby. We've got the Kaimai Range and Mount Pirongia that I often use as training tools, I guess, as well as being nice to be outside. So I guess some of the hikes that I've really enjoyed over the last probably 7 or so years, I've really enjoyed getting out above the bushline. So that's where a lot of my hikes have been, even though I don't really have any above bushline hikes in the immediate vicinity of where I live. Those are the ones that I've tended to aim for. So once or twice a year I aim to do a multi-day walk, and often I've chosen a spot to go above the bushline. Just the views, being able to see mountain after mountain, hill after hill is just incredible.
Yeah, you really are spoiled for choice in your part of the world. So, it sounds like you've listed off quite a few absolutely amazing trails. When we first started working together back last year sometime, you were leading into a tramp on the Hump Ridge track. Do you want to give me a bit of a rundown? What was the inspiration behind getting involved in that particular track?
Sure. So it's actually my mother who wanted to do it. She's now 72, and I guess the tramping that she's been doing recently is more where you just take a day pack or you have a pack service. So she's been, I guess, trying to carry less weight. So the tramping that she's been doing, as I said, you either have a pack carry service or she's been tramping from a base and only using something a bit bigger than a day bag to go hiking with. So I was very cognizant of that, and I was thinking I would really like to do one kind of, it sounds a bit morbid, I guess, but I'd like to do one decent tramp with my mum before she can't carry a full pack anymore. And so I suggested to her, how about we go away this Christmas? She lives in Australia, so I said when she comes over to New Zealand every year for Christmas, so I said, why don't we do one last kind of big tramp where we carry full packs, and where would you like to go? I thought I'd give her the opportunity to say where she would like to go. So there was two tramps that we were looking at. One was the Banks Peninsula walk and the other was the Hump Ridge. And I guess Mum had heard good things about the Hump Ridge track, so that's where we ended up going.
So for those who might not have heard of the Hump Ridge track before, roughly how many days does it generally take, and roughly how long is the actual distance?
The track is 3 days. It's a set distance. The huts you have to book in advance, and it's 62 kilometres, so it's just over 20 kilometres each day for the 3 days.
We were working a little bit together leading into the process of this. Do you want to talk us a little bit through your training process leading up to the trip? So what you were doing sort of initially when you first had the trip in your sights and you're like, I want to get ready for this. And also sort of once we started training together, what we started doing to sort of lead you into this adventure.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we knew probably about August that we were going to be doing this trip. I had been skiing up until October, so I kind of had figured that would be enough fitness, and then during October I was just probably only doing one big walk a week, or not even a big walk really. It was only about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, but it was uphill. It was out in the mountains, so I was doing that once a week, and then of course, I contacted you and got on board with you. So I started out doing just very small walks, 2 hours on the weekend, and increasing that by, I think it was half an hour each weekend. And in addition to that, I was doing some strength training, and I was also doing additional cardio work, either on the cross trainer or the indoor bike or on the treadmill, and then just incrementally increasing the hiking each weekend, adding additional time.
And then was there anything in the training process which, out of the things you mentioned, that was sort of maybe not so familiar for you or was surprisingly effective in the sense that you might not have done it in the past, but you noticed its help on the trail or in your preparations?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things is that I did have an injury. I had a hip injury, an outer hip problem, which my physio had actually told me that I wasn't allowed to walk for any significant distance. It was fine to walk around the block, but he wanted me to stop hiking. So with that in mind, we were using the cross trainer, the indoor bike, and I started swimming. I hadn't swum in 30 years since I was at school. So I guess it was quite unnerving. I had always been used to, in the past, I had always been used to using the hikes that I would do in the weekend as a measure of how fit I was getting, because I would incrementally add time to those hikes and be aware that I was getting up to the expected time that I would be on the trail when I actually got to doing the trip. So not actually being able to use those hikes as a measure of how I was faring was actually quite unnerving. So yeah, I was using a mixture of the cross trainer, the indoor bike, and swimming to maintain cardio fitness. And as I said, those aren't things that I would normally have used to maintain my cardio fitness. I would typically have either used a treadmill, or I would have just been running, or I would have actually been out there hiking to get that fitness in.
Remind me, did we do that all the way till the end? And I think we just put a couple of walks in the final weeks. Was that how it all played out, or how close before your hike did you start actually hiking again?
It was only about 2 weeks prior to doing my walk that I actually got out there and got out into the hills and did a couple of small walks, only about half 1.5 hours, I guess. So yes, I maintained the swimming and the cross trainer and the indoor bike right up until the end.
It might be stretching a memory a little bit, but when it came down to those final weeks where you finally got back into a little bit of walking and you had your big trek looming over you, how were you feeling, like mentally and physically? Did you step on those walks and you're like, you know what, I'm actually feeling pretty good? Or were you still sort of feeling a bit stressed or maybe a bit worried that you were going to be ready?
Well, the couple of walks that I did do prior to my big trip, felt fine. I was really conscious that they were only an hour and a half type length. So I was still nervous, I guess you could say. I was still a little bit nervous about how I would go. But there was also things that I'd picked up in your podcasts that helped me. Things like getting hiking poles, the magnesium oil. There were little tips and things that you gave me along the way that just kind of gave me those tools in my arsenal, I guess. And I thought, if I'm adding in all these tools, I've done all the fitness, I've done all the cardio, despite not actually having been out walking for any serious length of time. I had some level of comfort knowing that you knew what you were talking about, and we had those tools in place.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. For anyone listening who's not aware of the magnesium oil that Nicola just mentioned, it's the spray-on topical magnesium oil, which you can, I'm a big fan of magnesium for a number of reasons, but this spray-on stuff, you can literally just spray it onto any particular muscles, which are a little bit achy, a little bit sore, and it gives pretty quick relief, and it might not fix anything, but it definitely can ease off a bit of discomfort, and I'm a big fan of that. And I think that's a really, really important point just to emphasize on a lot of people who might be listening. And if you are in this situation where you're leading up to an adventure and you might be in the situation which I know a lot of people are, where you can't be doing as much walking as you'd like and you are worrying, there are things you can do, and there's always a process that you can do to make up that fitness and get yourself in a position. So while you're healing, at least you're still maintaining things, if not progressing things. So I'm so glad that it did end up playing out for you, and you trusted me with that process, which I appreciate. Mm-hmm. So you went through your training, you went through that process, you got over that speed bump, you got those final 2 weeks, you're back on the hiking, and then you actually stepped on the trail. Do you want to talk me through a little bit around the specifics of the actual trip and any particular challenges that might have come up while you're actually on the trail?
It's a stunning walk. It starts, for anyone who doesn't know, the Hump Ridge track is in the southwest of the South Island. It's a stunning walk. It starts through bush, and then it heads out onto a beach, follows a beach along for quite some way, and then it heads up to some limestone tors, limestone outcrops. So it's absolutely stunning up there. You're above the bush line. You can see what feels like forever around the coastline. You can see in towards the land where there's beautiful lakes and hills and so forth. It's just a wonderful track. It's a little bit different. The huts are sell goods, which I'm not used to in New Zealand. I'm used to our backcountry huts, but on this trip the huts actually sell food, and you can actually get a sleeping bag if you want to. If you don't want to actually carry all your equipment, you can hire a sleeping bag off them. So you can take things a little easier if you want to on this particular tramp. So that's the first day, is along the beach, and then heading up. You head up to almost 1,000 metres, and they say between 7 and 9 hours for the first and the second day. I found that the time it took me was roughly on the 7 hours, so at the lower end of what they suggest is the walk time. My mum, she beat me every day. Every day she was out in front of me, despite being 25 years older than myself. She made it to each hut probably a good half hour, if not more, faster than what I did. So she's incredible how fit she is. The second day then goes from above the bush line. It heads down through the bush and along a whole series of tram tracks, old tram tracks, to a sawmilling village, or what used to be a sawmilling village in the early 1900s. So it's quite an interesting spot. They've got a whole heap of sawmilling relics. There's remains of the old wharf, the boiler houses, machinery and so forth. So it's quite an interesting spot. I guess the second day was all or mostly downhill, and there is a lot of boardwalk on this track. There's, I think, roughly 12 kilometres of boardwalk throughout the track, and that's to protect some of the plants or some of the fragile alpine areas. So it is a little bit rough on your feet, or a bit tough on your feet, and I guess that is probably the one thing that I found, because I wasn't walking in preparation for the trip. I found that my feet probably weren't as conditioned as they would have been if I had been able to hike leading up to the trip. So I did end up with 2 black toenails, which I still have, and I guess they will take some time to grow out, and they were quite painful. Fortunately, I didn't even really feel them until the last day. It wasn't until probably the last maybe 2 hours that I actually started to feel them. I didn't even realise I had black toenails, and I did end up with some blisters on my heels, but again, it wasn't until the last couple of hours that I actually realised that I had them. So the challenge that I had was more after the track rather than while I was actually on the track.
Yeah, fair enough. And I've been there with the black toenails, and it just goes on forever, doesn't it? It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it sure does.
So on that note, with blisters, you've got a bit of quite a lifelong experience of hiking. What's your go-to tip for dealing with blisters?
Yeah, this was quite a difficult one. It wasn't a surface blister. It wasn't something that's just on the skin that you could prick and let go. It was really deep on the sole of my foot. So for that I couldn't really do anything at all. There was no way to get to it. If it was a surface blister, depending on where it was and how much it was troubling me. I might have pricked it with a sterile needle and then covered it up with a plaster. But in this case, I couldn't do that. It was really quite deep in the sole of my foot, unfortunately.
So it was just grin and bear it, hey?
Yeah, yep, it was. It was a couple of hours. Those the last 3 or so kilometres of that walk, I was walking very gingerly, but it didn't matter. It was the end, so I could take my time.
Yeah, fair enough. So I would love to ask you a few post-adventure reflection questions now, because I always find, even though that trip was a while ago now, I always find reflecting a little bit about the process leading up to it and while you're actually on the trail can be a really, really great thing just to sort of wrap things up and also just appreciate, the adventure for what it was. So out of the whole process, like from beginning of the first inspiration to literally stepping off the trail, were there any particular lessons you might have learned which you'll apply to your future hiking?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I mentioned around not being able to hike in the lead up and utilising other methods of cardio fitness like the swimming, that was quite a challenge, and it was really a process of trusting you at the time, which I'm really glad that I did. I'm really glad that I had you there to talk through and get those tips and tricks, and just someone who could be a voice of reason there. So I think the big lesson for me was that, yes, I can get fit without resorting to having to go hiking every weekend or walking distances during the week, around the block or wherever. So I think trusting in the process, trusting that, yes, I am getting fitter. I was swimming twice a week. I was cycling once a week, and I think the cross trainer once a week. So I had 3 or 4 cardio sessions packed into a week, and just trusting that, yes, I was actually getting fitter. I was doing good. I was advancing and progressing. So I think that was the biggest lesson for me.
Fair. And then would there be anything that you would do different next time? So whether it's regards to your training or actually while you're on the trail, is there anything you change?
Everything worked out really well on the trail. I was really, really pleased with everything that worked, like everything from the hiking poles, the magnesium oil, taking my tennis ball to muscle release work on my buttocks and so forth, on my hip and everything. That worked really well. I think the only thing that I probably would have done is given it more time to the lead up. So I only started training 2 months, I think it was 2 months prior to my trip away. And if I had had a 3rd month, I think that would have probably given me a little bit more peace of mind around how I was doing physically.
What would you say was the low light of the trip, and what would you say was the highlight?
Oh, jeepers. I think maybe the low light was coming off the track and having those blisters and having the toenails. Both Mum and I, our feet did suffer. So that was probably the only low light, but it's not much of a low light in comparison to the highlight of the trip. And the highlight, I guess, was the stunning scenery at the very top of the track, which is where we had the limestone tours. And so these are the amazing kind of limestone rock formations. And you've got little tarns or little lakes up there reflecting. The views were just stunning. So I would encourage anyone to go and have a Google at the Hump Ridge track and have a look at the limestone tours. They're just stunning. And the sea views, the coastal views, just incredible.
Amazing. I'll go when we hop off this. I'm definitely going to go check that out. That sounds beautiful. And then what's the next adventure?
The next adventure is I'm hoping to do the Travers Sabine Valleys. That's at the top of the South Island in New Zealand. The Travers Sabine is roughly a 6-day track. I'm not sure how many kilometres, but that's a track that I've looked at for a couple of years. There's some pretty long days in there as well. I think some of those days are 7 to 9 hour days. But again, stunning scenery and a lot of above the bushline walking, which I'm really looking forward to.
And then last question for you, and this is for the listeners who might be listening at some stage, whether it's now or in the future, and they find themselves in a position that you found yourself before leading into a trip. If someone was 2 months out from a trip, 6 weeks out from a trip, and they were experiencing a little bit of pain, a bit of discomfort, and they're told from a physio or a professional, look, you need to back off on your walking, and they were a little bit anxious about leading into their adventure, are there any words of advice you can give them to sort of help them through that sort of mindset?
Yeah, there's still plenty that you can do. Clearly you want to take your physio's advice, and they are probably going to give you some exercises. But I think the thing would be asking them, what can you do? They might tell you what you're not allowed to do, but ask them, what can you work on? For me, with my hip, it was just unloading my hip. So doing any exercise that didn't put any load or weight through my hip. So that's what I'd be doing, is I'd be asking the question, what can I do? Let them know that you do have a trip coming up. They'll obviously take that into account and try to keep you moving and in the best condition leading up to your trip.
Yeah, I think that's really, really, really powerful advice, because I know so many people go into that situation where, exactly as you said, they get told what they can't do, but they might not extend that discussion to what they actually can do and what they can be, what they get allowance to do to lead up. So I think that's a great point to end it on, and I really appreciate you sharing that. But thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it, and I feel like you've shared not only some really, really great insight into the Hump Ridge track and just how beautiful, and you painted a really, really nice picture of that adventure, but also sharing some great insight into your particular training process, which I know a lot of people will probably resonate with that sort of situation. So really, really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure to catch up with you again and talk through it.